Here's the situation. A residential property is assessed over a shared driveway. The owner of the subject states that they have legal easement to access their property. The appraiser reviews the two most recent deeds but finds no mention of easement, and ultimately cannot determine whether or not the subject property has legal access. The improvements are approximately 250 feet from the road and up a hill, and the estimated cost to install a new driveway is roughly $8,000. The appraiser thinks this would affect marketability and value, one way or another. What do you do? There are a few things to consider. First, you could define a scope of work with an appropriate fee that would allow you, the appraiser, to conduct interviews and enlist professional help to determine if there actually is legal access easement. While this might be a good answer if the assignment is for litigation, in non-litigation assignments, and specifically in lending assignments, this is not a luxury the appraiser has. It should be emphasized, however, that not having the luxury of due diligence is never an excuse for failing to produce credible results. If an extraordinary assumption that there is legal access is reasonable and would produce credible results, then it may not be absolutely necessary for the appraiser to conduct interviews and engage professional help to determine whether or not there is legal access. Second, you could use a hypothetical condition that the subject property has its own private driveway. However, it would likely not be appropriate since the facts are unknown. Now, if you, the appraiser, actually found recorded evidence of a shared easement but appraised the property as though the driveway were private, now that would be a hypothetical condition, which is contrary to fact. But again, the facts are unknown. Third, you could rely on the owner's information and appraise the property as is. This is certainly a possibility. It may be a very dangerous one, dangerous for you, the appraiser. Legal access is a big issue with real estate, though it may not carry the needed weight to impress upon the client or any other intended users that this is a very serious decision on the part of the appraiser. To appraise the property as is relies on the assumption that the owner is correct. Now, there are several differences between an assumption and an extraordinary assumption, but the main one to focus on is that an extraordinary assumption has the potential for affecting value, while the assumption does not. And finally, an extraordinary assumption that the current access is legal makes the most sense, as the facts are unknown and would affect the value. And that's exactly what an extraordinary assumption is for. It takes otherwise uncertain information and presumes it as fact. When making this decision, the appraiser must remember that even though the scope of work decision is his or hers to make, the process requires a clear knowledge and understanding of the intended use and intended users, which basically means the scope of work decision cannot be made in a vacuum. If an appraiser were to go out and unilaterally decide on scope of work without considering the client's needs, then there's a very good chance that the assignment results would not be credible for the intended use. What this means is that it would be necessary for the appraiser to communicate with the client or their agent before choosing. The appraiser is not asking the client's permission, but rather trying to determine what would provide credible results in the context of the client's intended use. Don't forget that USPAP requires that hypothetical conditions or extraordinary assumptions must be clearly and conspicuously disclosed in an appraisal report. It does not dictate form, format, or style, and it does not tell the appraiser where to put the disclosure, so it really doesn't matter how or where the extraordinary assumption or hypothetical condition is disclosed, as long as it is clear and conspicuous. In fact, it may be appropriate to repeat the disclosure in several places within the report so that the intended user will not miss it. One more consideration. If the client has requested that the appraisal be reported on Fannie Mae's URAR Form 1004, then at the bottom of page 2, there are 4 choices for how the appraisal was developed. 1. As is. 2. Subject to repairs based on a hypothetical condition. 3. Subject to completion per plans and specs based on a hypothetical condition. And 4. Subject to the following required inspection based on an extraordinary assumption. In the example we're discussing, the issue is not new construction, nor is an inspection required. It would therefore seem that the most logical choice would be to select the as-is box, but to take great care not to mislead. That is, to make absolutely certain that there is no question that the appraisal was developed using an extraordinary assumption concerning legal access. And the best way to do that is to keep reminding the client and intended users of the extraordinary assumption and that its use has the potential for affecting value.